Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Sebastian Stroller and today we want to talk about some laws and some rules regarding to the latest talk about physical trauma. If you have experienced physical trauma, mental trauma, the trauma of loss, or the trauma of missing developmental requirements. Each trauma creates a longing, seeking fulfillment, understanding, processing, and integration. We can have one of that specific trauma or a combination. You can have the trauma of loss and the trauma of missed developmental requirements. You can have mental trauma and physical trauma and the trauma of loss and the trauma of missing developmental requirements together. Each combination is possible. And what you feel, what drives you, what influences your decisions, behaviors, and so on, this is your trauma. And every trauma seeks integration. And unconscious or conscious, you try to fulfill that. With every behavior, every action, every decision you make in your life. And for example, addiction is a symptom of regulation. Any kind of addiction should regulate your emotional world. You may think you make conscious decisions, but decisions we make in our life are emotionally and emotions are managed, produced through your subconscious mind. That means that every conscious behavior you show is more or less organized by your subconscious and unconscious mind. That means whatever explanation people have for their conscious behavior, there are unconscious mechanism, unconscious longings, unconscious seeking behind that. And behind sub and unconscious is mostly trauma. Every addicted people saying, not every, over 95% of all addicted people saying they experienced any kind of childhood trauma. The trauma of loss in childhood, the trauma of physical abuse in childhood, and so on. Every addicted people who try to withdraw from the addiction returns to addiction within the first year. The numbers here also over 90%. The perpetrator, and this is not an excuse, we just want to show the structure. The perpetrator, also basically every perpetrator, faced childhood trauma. Childhood trauma can influence you become perpetrator or influence you become addicted. And every perpetrator who was or received punishment from the legal system including prison, also become perpetrator and or prisoner again within 2 years. The numbers here are far over 80%. That means we have more or less exactly the same numbers on the perpetrator page and the victim page. And in other videos, I have explained that how our sub and unconscious moves us over and over in the same situation to identify and understand what we have to solve. That means the victim is on the loop to solve their trauma, and the perpetrator is on the loop to solve the perpetrator trauma. That means both experience from the view of the emotional world the same thing. The perpetrator try to regulate himself through that wrongdoing and through that criminal activities, and the victim try to regulate the experience through addiction. For example, they both on the loop. And that's why it is important that if you have experienced any kind of physical or mental trauma, that you bring this into the legal system. Right? Let's assume you drive with your car 100 in the 30 zone. You would get a punishment. If you drive 100 in the 30 zone without driver license, you get a harder punishment. If you're driving 100 in the 30 zone without driving license and drunk, you get an even more harder punishment. If you drive 100 in the 30 zone without driving license and drunk and make an accident, the punishment get even harder. And if someone get injured, drunk without driving license, even more harder. And that's why it is important, for the same reason, you bring your case into the system, right? the perpetrator is also on the loop. And there is basically a 100% chance that he do it again. And the chance is high that he get caught sooner or later. Even if your case don't get immediate attention, but the case is in the system. And if that perpetrator get caught and identified, and then is already a record about the perpetrator in the system, the potential punishment increases. Bringing your case into the system is not against them. This is for you. Sooner or later, the loop closes. And as I say in another video, the perpetrator feel exactly like you feel, with the numbers, with their trauma, is basically the same for perpetrator and victim. That means they also feel the same. They regulate this different. This depending on social environments, education, financial background, and so on. Right? If you face childhood trauma and your environment is financially healthy, you could get a proper therapy intervention. If this has happened to you without any financial background, you may get lost somewhere on the street. This sounds hard, but unfortunately, this is kind of reality. And you are the fixed point of your perpetrator. Everything a perpetrator is doing is to cover his criminal activity and excuse this somehow for themselves. And if they're circling around you, you must be someone very special. And someone very special should live a happy and fulfilled life. And this is what scared the perpetrator the most. not the potential consequences, not the potential legal system. Seeing the victim living a happily fulfilled life. This cut their emotional world into pieces. And they may try to attack the victim even more. And with this behavior, you can see how they feel, what their emotional world experience. I invite you to do them the favor and live a happy and fulfilled life. The perpetrator can't do different as cover things up, and they are willing to do everything what's needed to not get caught. Doesn't matter what they're showing the world, doesn't matter what they say, who they are. If they are alone, everything circles around their criminal activities. Because no criminal want to face the consequences. Especially abuser. Abuser have a hard life everywhere. They are willing to throw everything and everyone under the bus to cover this up, to protect themselves. And that's a clear indicator how they feel. They feel like you feel. You can process that. They cannot. Not because this is impossible, but because they have to solve their childhood trauma. They have to process guilt, and there is happen what has been done. Then who they lie to, and so on. And then if they would seeking therapeutic help, they have to enter the system, and in that system they get told, for example, addiction is a disease. And not all, but it's very common that on top of lying, pretending, performing to calm themselves, they also use substances like alcohol, for example. That means they have to withdrawn from addiction. They have to solve the childhood trauma. They have to process guilt. And then they have to process all the action they have done to cover this up. I don't think this is impossible, but that's a big challenge for an alcohol addicted abuser. And if they would use on top of that potent sleeping medication, antidepressant, and so on, as getting more and more complex. You, as the victim, you don't have this problem. You only need to integrate your trauma, and then you can enjoy a happy life. And to make this a bit easy, imagine your life as a movie. There's just one requirement. You have to become the good guy. And like in every movie, the good guy always wins. And at the moment, it's just the phase in the movie where the hero had a rough time. And as it is your movie, you can write the next scene. And you still can write an end. And how this end should look like. And so on. It's your movie. And if you want me to become part of your movie, I work online and directly in Chiang Mai in Thailand. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.